Hello, Internet. It's time for another Wednesday Serials kind of thoughts things. I have a few things I wanted to put together, so I'm going to try to make a through line here. The first is this shirt here, Glare. If you're into video games at all, this was a game made by a lot of my friends. I helped playtest and accidentally some of the initial stuff. That's a whole nother story. If you're into platformers at all, please go check it out. The studio is now defunct, but it's kind of a cool platformer. It helps support them and whatnot. It's a little late, but it's out there. Should be cheap. I kind of wanted to bring that up because they were a smaller studio, and part of the reason that I feel they didn't necessarily get the sales and the numbers and the views that they should have is because they didn't focus on advertising as much as other things. They didn't focus on getting the word out. And ultimately there wasn't a lot of buzz or pomp and circumstance. If you look at most video games on, say, YouTube, you're going to find a fair amount of material, and Glare is one of those games where there just isn't as much because there wasn't as much in talk about it. And that's kind of what I want to talk about with comics here, was kind of what we do and how that kind of, in a way, affects the kind of comics at large. It's kind of interesting. I was kind of breaking some things down, and on my videos, I tend to average about 100 viewers with like a 20 viewer swing one way or the other-ish. I'm hoping to try to do something to up that a little bit, because I used to be a little higher and kind of like to get back there. There's a lot of other people who do better or worse than me, obviously, but notably is someone like Ghost Critic, who averages like 200-ish people of video. I just kind of took a quick look, and that seemed to be roughly within a thing. It was interesting because I was comparing that to sales. So, what's kind of interesting about sales is, and I was talking about this with my Minutia Minute forever ago, is that how many sales a comic makes, used to more, and now kind of in a way, is still dependent on how you sold versus Batman. It's almost like alcohol by blood volume, right? So if you went over a Batman, you'd have like a 1 point something, which would mean you're dead. In this case, you'd be doing amazing. But in some ways, like, you'd be selling point something of a Batman, which is to say roughly, because Batman's been averaging around like 100,000. So that's kind of like your high mark for comic sales. When you start getting down, you start looking at kind of the mid-range stuff. A lot of that stuff is in or around like 10,000 units sold. And so what's interesting is if you start putting that together, at like roughly 100 views for like a lot of the mid-range comic stuff, where I feel like my opinion might actually have a little more influence as to whether people would check something out or not, you're looking at like a % swing. So that could, especially when you're talking about those mid-range books, that kind of starts to affect like some of the lower books, like whether they start to swing up to get a little more popularity and notice, or if they start to look at more of like getting onto the chopping block, especially if they're part of the big two or something like that, or if something's really more competing with the big two or not. It's kind of that more nebulous end, but still very notable chunk of comic sales. And so to the end that I could be talking to a % to go either way on something, I feel that's something. What's interesting is I was talking about Turtles, but then I noticed I really started liking Turtles a lot more when I started realizing, like, yeah, I love Turtles and I've always loved Turtles, but this isn't a nostalgia thing. this run on this comic is actually legitimately amazing, and it is legitimately one of the best comics on the shelves. I mean, obviously, my opinion, I want to get to that a little bit, but it's a damn good comic. And Sleepy Reader was tracking these sales more than I was at first, and he was saying, like, you keep talking it up every month, and the sales seem to go up a little bit every month. And it's funny because I know more recently, a lot of people who I actually do have a back and forth with were telling me that, yeah, they were going to try Turtles, and they all pretty much jumped on with this new arc. And that was a while ago now. And I mean, the sales for Turtles has gone up a little bit more. And I'm kind of like... I something about that correlation made me realize, like, it might be small, it might be like a fraction of a percent, but still, like, me just coming on here doing something kind of affected Turtles selling better than other comics kind of in that range, in sense, you know, ways, like, I mean, some of that's gonna spill out, and, like, it kind of has had a small but steady kind of upward thing. I mean, some dips and dives, but it's just kind of crazy to think, you know, like, I'm not saying I'm responsible for that. No, I wouldn't say that. But I mean, if I could say that there's one book that, like, I've pushed hard enough and maybe had some success with getting more people to check it out, that was it. And it's like, so, I mean, I had a little bit of influence, like, on the comic charts for all these years that I've been doing these videos, and that's kind of a crazy feeling to kind of, like, realize that, like, yeah, I mean, it's not a huge thing. I mean, with or without me, it would have more or less been the same thing, but a little bit, you know, was there. It's just it's kind of interesting and feels like kind of a pebble in the greater lake, and it's kind of interesting. It made me realize that maybe I don't know if I should necessarily be saying I should take, like, my videos or anything more seriously, but realize that, you know, there's a little bit of weight, a little bit of something behind this, you know, just a few people jibber jabbering about comics. I mean, there's enough eyeballs here because it's YouTube, and I mean, as much as I want the numbers and everything to go up, that's kind of secondary for me compared to the people that I actually get to talk to in Hangouts or in the comment section, or anybody who actually reaches out to me. Like, that's my number one love and why I really do keep doing this. And so it's kind of interesting to think something that's been pretty secondary to me for all the years I've been doing this, to realize that actually, you know, is part of it too, whether I intend it to or not. And I mean, again, like, I'm not trying to be ego trip. I mean, that's anyone who does this. More notably, anybody who does this and has a larger viewing audience. Someone more like Ghost Critic, or I did start looking to see, like, who you pull up when you just pull up comic reviews, and there's some guys who are newer who clearly have a production behind them and have some sort of conglomerate behind them, like Variant Comics, if you've seen that. That's come up more recently. And, I mean, that's part of the same network that Revision 3, which does stuff like that's associated with Philly D, that's associated with, for the video gaming stuff, all the Revision 3 gaming stuff, which has people like Adam Sessler, who used to be on TV. Like, that's a whole nother deal. Like, I'm talking about the YouTube of people who just do this for the fun of it. The fuck of it. The fucking fun of it. And that's awesome. That is awesome. The fact that she loves the character, but she's buying the book regardless, as I said. Now, what's interesting to me about that now is we're reaching a point where we're seeing the companies, if the sales get low, they chop the book, even though it's a character that they clearly shouldn't. And we, as the buying public who enjoys this, know that it just needed new creative staff, and people were buying it because the book should be better. But when you stop buying the book, they cut it. So I'm like, well, this is insane. Like, I would love to buy Batwoman again, but I'm not gonna buy it when it's a piece of shit and these creators clearly don't know what they're doing. I mean, I went on a little bit of a limb, but I read one issue and I'm like, no. And it's not gonna get better. It's not gonna be anything I want to read. I mean, I knew at least a little bit in my head, yeah, it's gonna have to get better from here because this issue is garbage and they have to go up. But that was more of a, you know, like mincing quality levels, not like anything I'd want to read. And so, and just hearing her talk about this, it was kind of tearing me up inside because I've been there and we've all been there, but this is the first time for her, so it hurts so much more. Where it's this character you love and kind of like you have a special attachment to, whereas a lot of people don't. And there's a creator on it, and they're not doing a good job. They almost bring out everything negative about the character that people said and assume about the book. And you know it can be so much more. And maybe it will never be as grand as whatever brought you and made you love it to that level. But it should be better than that. And that's so many. This has happened so many times. It's just part of buying superhero comics. But I told her, like, you have to write in. You have to write in and explain this to DC. You need to have almost like a memo for them to explain, I am paying for this because I love this character, but I do not like these creators. You need to change it up. And I feel like that needs to be justified to say, like, and even if you canceled it, like, if you love the character that much, you should say something. You should write in. And I kind of realized I should be doing a little more myself, and I'd kind of like to appeal, because I know they don't watch these videos as much as we put it out, but I'm sure there's someone kind of tallying general amounts of actual written-in letters, not like emailed necessarily, though that's, I think, about as well responded to. But you have to write in, because you need to be stand up and be counted in that sense. And when you think about it, a lot of the great moments in comic history are tied to fan reaction. Just off the top of my head, I mean, I know there's the call-in with the Robins and all that, but kind of how they steered and veered the Batman St. Paul Valley to Azrael was in part due to fan reaction. But one of the biggest ones I was thinking of, and we don't live in that society anymore, sadly, and reaction's so much easier, so it doesn't necessarily have this impact, but Amazing Fantasy 15 was supposed to be it. It was supposed to be a one-off for Spider-Man. So many people wrote in and said, we love this, we want more. Spider-Man was given a shot as a comic, and look where that led. And then look at where that went with, I mean, you get to over 100 issues in, and then there's that famous drug issue with Harry Osborn and Spider-Man. And that was something that was inspired. It went off the code, and because the sales reaction, honestly, there is so much hubbub around that. Can't tell you how many comic documentaries I've seen where they're just talking about comics in general, and that moment comes up. The code, they flew without the code, the reaction was there on the street, they were actually talking about drugs and something real, and it was something relevant. And I mean, honestly, that was, fuck comic history, that was an American media moment. That is right up there with H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds on the radio. Like, that is an American cultural moment that America should know if you know American history. Like, that's a big thing, and that was more than fan reaction, but I mean, that's like reaction to an issue. That's huge. It was actually interesting hearing, I mean, on the flip side, the whole Speedy deal with the drugs was actually written before that, but DC refused to go with that until that Spider-Man issue came out, because at the time Marvel had more of a gall to try to do that sort of thing, and then DC followed suit, and that was still a big deal, though, you know. It's just, I mean, that sort of thing is a big deal in that reaction. That's more a comic soliciting a reaction. But, I mean, if there's a character that, I mean, should be pushing people's buttons right now, it should be Batwoman for a few reasons. And I feel like we should all take the time sometime soon, if we were reading and then dropped off or not or something, to write into DC and say, look, you need to let this character run, and you may have gotten rid of some characters, but you need to bring someone on who's willing to go the gambit, because I feel like DC's trying to appeal to people, but they don't understand what made that character work. I think they're treating it like any other Bat tie-in, when honestly I think that was the last thing that is what made Batwoman Batwoman. And I'm getting that sense from that, and it all ties back to Reader 1717's video, where she's telling people, like, she's buying it, but she's kind of realizing, like, she wouldn't recommend it to anyone right now. Like, it's a comic she's going to buy till it dies, but she couldn't recommend it to a soul. And that's weird. It's like you almost have to stand up and be counted and justify to the company that you're paying that money, like, why you're doing it. They need to realize it. And I mean, it's a certain amount of, if you want to call it social responsibility or something, but I mean, when we're putting out these videos and we're talking with each other, that's part of it too, and it's just our opinions and it's all that, but we just need to, in a way, stand up, be counted, and that's a lot of why I do this too, and just, you know, talk it out. But I mean, realize, I mean, a lot of times we talk about, like, the good, the bad, the why, the whatever, but I mean, again, why? We should know why we think it's good or bad, or why one thing or another isn't justified. So, I hope you all are enjoying it. I know this video is super rambly, as these are want to be. But next time you flick on the camera and start rambling about comics, please think about it a little bit more, maybe? I don't know. I mean, I always try to, and so I appreciate that. And, oh my god, I'm going to go on another tangent here real quick. I want to give a huge props, I already did, but to Red Vitamin Blue. He's doing something that I've tried to do and I was never able to complete. He went through some arcs with X-Men and really broke them down, took his own personal reflections, looked throughout the work, really treated it like a piece of work, and really, you know, dug in and found the nuances and the deeper parts and the emotions and the through lines and, like, what it could and should represent. Like, really took this small part of Claremont's run and really made something more of it. Really, I mean, these are comics I haven't read, but eras I've touched with and understand, and gave me more appreciation for it. And thinking about it, I'm like, oh man, there's some arcs or some runs I really like too. And I've actually tried twice and fallen short because they never get the views you want. But it's real work that he's putting out there. Like, that's something that's a real boon to the comics conversation. And he's talking about doing the Phalanx Covenant next, which is another thing I've never read, but it's something I wanted to talk about with him. Because he mentioned it to me before. He's also talking about Age of Apocalypse, which is interesting, but maybe he could see something more there. I think it's Age of Apocalypse is an interesting moment in comic history for a few reasons, but I don't think it's particularly well written, especially compared to some of the other stuff he talked about. Yeah, but I mean, I've tried to do this before. I went through a chunk of a Daredevil run and never really finished it, but there's some really cool stuff in the what was the Marvel Knights Daredevil that kind of just spilled out to just being Daredevil by the end. Also, the initial run on Deadpool, which I should get back to, but there's a lot in there. It's rare that you see someone kind of try to unpack it and make more of those comics, and as great as it is to talk about what's coming out, I think going back and finding stuff that is of particular note, especially something that might not have particular reference, something like Watchmen, Planetary, or Preacher, but some stuff that maybe just doesn't get as much love as it should, and adding to that conversation, I think is really noteworthy. So, when people are doing that, I know they're not always the sexiest videos, but I think they're more interesting if you give them a minute to get warmed up. So, yeah. An appeal for deeper videos. So anyways, if you stuck around this long, thank you so much for hearing my bizarre rambling. Hopefully I can try to confine it more. Maybe that's part of my problem, is I don't take the time to plan out these videos as much as I should. Yeah. So hints, tips, or tricks, leave that below, because I could stand to up my quality, man. Peace out, and I will catch y'all soon. And I'll talk about, sequential images and shit. But to the responsibility of it, I do kind of wish that, I know 100 to 200 viewers isn't necessarily huge numbers to a lot of people, but when you're talking comic numbers, even compared, I know the numbers were bigger for, like, something like Wizard or something, but for what this is, the people who have kind of stuck around and made a name on YouTube, if you will, like, for where comic numbers are now, I honestly feel like some people should be taking maybe a little bit more note, because that seems to be where some of the comic vying public is, and that it's a more true representation than something like Newsarama or something, where they're kind of on the live and dime where they have to play nice with Marvel and DC, and I think there should be a little recognition of people who don't have to play nice. Like, they bought their comics, and they are going to like them or lump them on true merits, and not to try to get, and not have to balance we can only see so much bad if we expect to get previews next month, even if this was a piece of shit. And so many of us have had internal struggles and all that with, how do you deal with a negative review, especially more if it's indie. But, for the Marvel stuff, Marvel or DC, the big two. And it is, I know Image is starting to hit that level, but I still feel like an Image comic, you give a little more thrift, or there's a little more idea of, this isn't my bag, than this is a bad comic, generally. Not always, but generally. Versus a Marvel or DC, it's the superhero, it's the rot, it's the, when it's bad, when it's good for the most part, and opinions will differ, of course, but it's your impression, and it's fair. And it's big enough that you're not, like, trashing someone's dream or something. And it's something that we struggle with, and even me bringing that up, like, I feel like I have to do this whole narrative thing that we've all said 100 times. And that brings me to something that I wanted to mention, because it was something that really hit me today when I was watching one of Reader 1717's videos, where she was talking about Batwoman, and she's buying it, but she's not liking it, but she just has such a love for the character. And in doing this, it's interesting, because it's interesting for me, especially from her, and she does great videos, and I'm hoping you're watching because I'm going to ping you. I want to say Reader, but sometimes I feel like Reader 17 or Sleepy Reader. Who are you talking to? But she does really good videos, and when she's just talking her opinion, she does great. But what's interesting for me, as one of the few who has been here long enough and seen some of the cycle through, is it's really clear to me that she's new not only to reading, but to making the videos, because a lot of the things that I feel a lot of us struggle with early on, she's kind of doing now. And it's like that, you don't just say, like, I'm going to spoil or not spoil it. It's kind of like a justification of it. She has a lot of, like, oh, I kind of did end up buying this, but I wouldn't do it. It's a lot of justification. And I feel like as people do this more, they're more willing to say, this was my call, this was my opinion, and we'll say why when it's something relevant to the book. But as far as like saying like I bought this comic because I wanted to check it out, yeah, it's $3.99. You're willing to hang your hat on that because we've all been through that. And I know in some of my earlier videos, and honestly when that was kind of a newer thing, because I'm an old person who's done everything. I did all that. If you look back at my videos, I did all the stuff that I kind of complain about or kind of groan when I hear people do it now. And I try not to, and then sometimes I still do, and we all make dumb mistakes, we all ramble, and that's all these videos are anyways, right? So I found it interesting. But what was really interesting about her talking about Batwoman was